Welcome to the 52nd episode of Downtime Podcast. Today, you only have Alyssa on the line, but I have a very special guest with me. He is an independent game developer from Canada in the Toronto, Ontario area. And not only does he create games, but he's also a comic book artist and just very well-rounded and has a lot of different projects on him. So welcome to the podcast, Benjamin Rivers.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes. And like I said before, thank you so much for joining on the podcast. I've played Home and Alone with you before, so I'm really excited to talk to you about all of these things.
Can't wait. Let's go dig those things up. Get some good deep dives going on.
So just to start off the podcast, you can talk a little bit about your background growing up, and before you got into game development, what games you played and what inspired you to become a game developer.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm not young anymore, sadly. So my first video game console was an Intellivision, and it was a hand-me-down console that my brother played. And then I got when he was older than me, so he was off doing other things. And what happened was after the video game crash of the early 80s, in the mid-80s, you could buy games for consoles like that super cheap. And my mom took me to a Woolworths at the time in northern Manitoba, Canada, and basically we just bought a box full of games for I think they were about $2 each. And I kind of just started digging into all these titles that I'd never seen before, some of which became sort of my favorites for life. And then from that point, I started thinking about what kind of games I wanted to play, and then I started designing games on paper, old Intellivision games.
Oh wow!
And that was kind of my first foray into quote-unquote game design, even though I didn't really understand it at the time.
Was there a specific type of game that you were creating, or were you just kind of trying to flesh out all of these ideas that you had?
The one I remember, and sadly I do not have this design document anymore, but I designed a River City Ransom style, urban street brawler. I have no idea why. And so I think I used graph paper, or maybe it was just leftover note paper from my dad's office, but I had just stitched all these pages together to design this really long brawler scenario. And if you remember the Intellivision, most of the humans on that console all kind of look the same. They all just sort of look like Intellivision Man. And so I designed a version of Intellivision Man, except that, I don't know, he had brass knuckles or a baseball bat or something. I really don't know what that was about. That's pretty exciting.
I was about to say, I'm currently playing a brawler-ish game right now. I'm playing the Yakuza series.
Right. Yeah, this was 1983 Yakuza.
That's exciting. Creating those stories and getting first into game design, how did you start, developing your skills to become a full-fledged designer?
All of it was kind of accidental and through a variety of means. It was kind of like I was circling a drain, and then eventually I found it. Because I had no training. I don't have too much training in anything, actually. I'm mostly self-taught. But I went to school for graphic design, so that's sort of where I got my honed my design skills, my business acumen, working for a company that I worked for about almost 7 years, and at various freelance gigs and other placements. And I kind of got to learn the really real world through all of that, which is everything I owe to sort of my success today as a game developer was because of being able to work in a company and work alongside really smart people and understand design and business, and a creative business especially, which of course video games are. And prior to that, learning things like art and whatnot was all just brute force and having no idea what I'm doing, and just struggling through a bunch of trial and error and figuring things out. But sort of in the 90s, what happened was I got access to creating game mods and levels, and that started with Wolfenstein, where I realized you could make your own levels, and I didn't have the capability to do it just then. Because I didn't have a computer till a little bit later, but I used to design levels on graph paper and build out Wolfenstein maps. And then eventually I got access to do that, and I did. But the big thing for me was making Doom levels. When Doom came out, it had an editor that came out, and I created schools. I created, these like epic environments. I tried to make levels as big as my crappy 46 could allow, and did the same thing with Duke Nukem 3D levels, and went on from there. So that was my first taste of actually building a thing for a game that was a real playable product. And we used to, again, dating myself, we used to take floppy disks to high school, design little labels for the levels that we made, and the little WAD description documents and all that kind of stuff, and then we would trade them, so we had to make a level that would fit onto a single floppy disk, or else you couldn't share it with anybody.
Like those original mods that you're talking about with Doom and Wolfenstein, what language were you using?
Nothing. You were just using an editor.
Wow.
So for Doom, there were things like Doom Ed, and there was a bunch of other ones. I think I had the one that was... I don't think I used the good one. I think I used the one that was harder to use. I think maybe the good one didn't come out till a little bit later. I think the good one was Doom Ed, but I kind of forget now. Well, with Wolfenstein, I absolutely forget what programs they were. They were usually DOS programs that you would launch, and in the case of Doom and Wolfenstein, there was nothing... there's no way to preview your work. You kind of just...
Trial and error.
Yeah, you use an interface, and if there was an error, like if two different vertices did not connect correctly in Doom to form two connecting walls, that'd be an error because the game couldn't run. And the only way to do that would be to save your project, quit, load up Doom in DOS with the WAD, using a command, and then try to... and then see if it loaded. If it didn't compile, it would give you an error, and then you would know that, oh man, I screwed something up, or my sector isn't laid out correctly, or some other nonsense like that.
And then have to do everything over again.
And then do it all over again. The build engine for Duke Nukem 3D was so revolutionary because you could actually go into the editor and preview what you were doing in real time, which was just felt like cheating almost. It was amazing. This is hours of your life saved, not having to recompile things and test them and all that kind of stuff. Which ironically is that sort of feeling and experience is what I go through every day all over again, just with my own games now.
From this point of creating mods, and that was like the first time you were creating games, and I know you said that you started off at a company. At what point did you kind of realize that you wanted to try to create something by yourself?
So what happened was around 2007 or so, a bunch of things converged, especially around here in Toronto. And a lot of that was that some people who were essential to the local art scenes and music scenes and other sort of creative circles were creating these events that also had video game related stuff in them, like mods, hacks, weird physical installations, very sort of artsy stuff. And then at the same time, some people were organizing these workshops that you could attend to teach people, especially people who weren't natively programmers, to I guess just get their hands dirty and figure out how to make a game. And then a bunch of other developers who had been around longer, like MetaNet and whatnot, here in the city, had started realizing, hey, there's other people here like us. We should reach out and start hanging out with them. And so all these things over a period of a couple of years converged, and then we end up getting things called like the Hand-Eye Society, which we still have today.
Okay.
For sort of arts-based programming of just getting people together every month to show off stuff, to meet, and then you got to realize, oh my god, there's like a ton of other people here making games. And then you got to meet sort of some of your heroes, and you got to meet people you'd never met before and see the up-and-coming group. And so I got to actually make my sort of first real full games at this incubator program, which was sort of all circling around this same community. We're really lucky in the city that we have an incredible arts community. We've always had a really strong creative community in general. And people in Toronto are also very driven just to do stuff with that. And, it's rare that someone just sits around and says, well, I don't really want to meet other people who do this stuff that I do. So thankfully, these things all just kind of happened, and it kind of kick-started all the rather large indie community we have now.
I didn't realize that Toronto had such a huge indie gaming community. If
I showed you a screenshot list of all the games on Steam that are made here, including some of the bigger selling ones, it might blow your mind.
That's really cool. What are some examples, just out of curiosity?
Big ones include, of course, like N++ and all the variations of that. Rogue Legacy. Oh god, I could go on forever. There's so many. Sword and Sorcery, which is one of the biggest ones. Guacamelee. Sound Shapes. Even Graceful Explosion Machine, which came out at launch on Switch. Tons of stuff.
You know what's really cool is hearing that, especially a lot of the developers are teaming up together and creating a community to support each other. That's one thing that I kind of don't hear often, or it does happen in just the computer science communities, but oftentimes a lot of people don't like helping each other out. So it's really cool to hear that there is a community like this that's very strong and still running. Yeah,
from what I understand, we are also fairly unique in the world, and that just the size of the city and the amount of people who sort of take action tends to be in our favor.
Got it. What are some pros and cons of being your own solo creator versus working at a company?
Okay, I mean, obviously the biggest pro is if you want to have creative control and you have your sort of own trajectory that you want to promote, you obviously can do it. And of course, the biggest con is that you get to incur all the risk and all the other weight that comes with that. And what I always tell other people who want to make indie games is that, you know, I've had students who want to like start companies right out of school, and I say, oh God, no, don't ever do that. You need to have like at least 5 years working for other people in a variety of spaces, because you do not have the skills yet to do this. It has nothing to do with how well you can design a game or how organized your design docs are, or, you know, how good of a 3D modeler or whatever. You need like that practical like real life day-to-day experience, like your mom and dad would basically tell you to do, like just about paying bills on time, like organizing things well in advance, being an acceptable human being, like 24/7. There's a ton of stuff that comes with running a business, especially a creative business. I think it's actually tougher than a lot of other businesses, because of the sort of personalities that are often involved. But you have to learn all of that. And the hardest part about being an independent game developer is, you know, I wear a dozen hats every day. I'm just like sit down in my pajamas and like doodle game design ideas on paper. I'm, you know, paying bills. I'm running game tests. I'm prepping business stuff for like months, years in advance. I'm worrying about like, how long are we going to be able to survive on X? Is something selling? Is something not selling? Like, also, is this bug that I'm trying to fix fixable? And what's my artist saying? You know, he has questions. And is this other stuff getting done on time? And you can see how it gets out of control very quickly.
Oh, I can definitely see that. I was about to say, especially for home, where essentially you created everything. You even created the sound design for home.
Yeah, and I mean, there's almost like everything you do, every project you have, there's a set number of sort of skill points you're going to put into that project. And sort of where you allocate those points depends on your skill set, the skill set of the people you're working with, you know, if you are working with people, timeline, all that kind of stuff. And the thing with home is that, you know, the skill points were all right in front of me because I didn't have anyone else to work with, and I didn't know what I was doing, essentially. So one of the ways I dealt with that was that a lot of the sounds, or rather the vast majority of the sounds, were all taken from royalty-free websites and sampled that way, and then edited and altered and designed later on as I sort of saw fit. And once I realized I could do that, I said, well, you know, on any day of the week I can make a game. I have the ability to basically make everything from scratch and use stuff like this to do it. And I don't need this huge team. And it was incredibly, very freeing, but also very, the responsibility to do right by the fact that you have this control was very obvious. And that's kind of what made the project fun in the end.
It's definitely a lot more common, not just with game development, but for anyone to just kind of be their own business and be their own freelance worker after realizing that, you know, the tools are in front of you. And if you put the time to like looking things up and like learning about it, you can try to manage everything by yourself, even if it is hard. I like that idea that you are capable of having your own creative control.
Yeah, the opportunity is out there for so much, but, you know, again, with great power comes great responsibility.
Going a little bit into home, which is the first game I actually played from you. Oh, so I do have to say this. It's crazy because I actually played it on the Vita, which I don't know if that's a common platform for people playing your games, because it is on mobile and PC. And then it's also on PlayStation 4, but I actually have a Vita, and that's where I played it for the first time because it was on the store. For me, it was a really cool experience. One, because I liked how it was a story that, even though the experience was short, I got a lot out of that experience. And it utilized a lot of things that really enhanced how I played it, such as playing with headphones and really like sitting down to finish it all in one playthrough. So I just had to say that I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
That's great. No, I thank you. Well, thank you for playing it, of course. But thanks for sort of using those suggestions and finding out that was actually helpful, because that was something that you always feel weird asking people to do because they're going to think you're a complete douchebag. But it seemed like the right thing to ask, and almost everyone who says they enjoyed the game the most has said that they did that.
I feel like you accomplished a lot in this game, but especially even though the graphics were pixelated, it still gave me that very eerie vibe to it.
That's great.
And I just wanted to learn more about your thought process of, you know what, I'm actually gonna make this pixelated, and you know what, I can make this scary even if it is pixelated. Yeah,
well, as I said before, I spent a lot of my sort of previous career in the design space, like in graphic design and web design and production. And in that world, you work on everything on a project basis. So you get a brief from a client, there's a goal that you have to achieve, and then everything you do is towards that goal. So when I got to doing this game, I realized that that was just a mode of working in that I was very comfortable with and I understood. So rather than just, blue sky, a game idea, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to create a design brief. I'm going to treat it like a jam game or like something that someone has handed me, and here are some parameters. And so the goal was to make a horror game that was unnerving, unsettling, hopefully mentally very stimulating, and to prove that you could do it with very lo-fi graphics. So the joke that I always say is all the nasty posts that I got when the game released were people arguing back and forth over whether I was a crappy programmer or whether I was a crappy artist. So the answer was, well, maybe both. But the whole point is I got the project done. And the game originally was meant to be, and you can find images of this online as well, but the game was originally meant to be much lower res, the original prototype. And in fact, it was also, I sort of ran with it, and then my wife said, you can't do that. That's you've gone too far. She's like, and I said, okay, what about this? And I showed her essentially a simplified version of what the final game looks like. And she says, okay, that's okay. You can do that. So I did that, and the game basically got a complete graphical overhaul halfway through development because I designed everything with the original sort of resolution. And then my wife, Nancy, put her foot down, and I said, okay. And then I had to go through and configure everything for the new higher resolution and whatnot. But the game is so low res, it's hilarious. Especially considering, what I'm sort of billing it as this big scary experience. But what you said to me is exactly what I hope people get out of it, because using sound design and hopefully using your imagination was also part of the design brief. Because it's my belief that, especially when you play narrative-based games or something that's really meant to sort of tap more into your emotions than, say, just twitch skills, players bring 50% of their experience to that. If you're not invested, then you're going to be disappointed no matter how much I do. So knowing that, I thought I can offload 50% of this idea onto the players if I do it right, in the correct way, and then they will buy in if things are presented correctly, which means that I don't have to spend an extra 6 months or 8 months messing with the graphics because I'm not sure that they're going to work in this format.
What you were saying about the player experience, for me, the very ambiguous ending, even though I did get a certain ending, it was still up for interpretation in my own head. And it's kind of what I make of the story after I complete the playthrough or while I'm playing through it. So I do like that idea, or I agree completely with the idea that as a video game player, that I'm putting my thoughts into this experience as well.
Right. And everybody does this when you play games. What's so funny is that sometimes the comments you hear, not just about Home, but about other games, can be very contradictory, because a lot of players will talk about how they love certain online multiplayer games and whatnot because they get to sort of infuse like their story and their kind of life into the experience. And then often get players of those same games sort of like talk about the game on the forum for Home and be like, well, I don't get it because it didn't tell me anything. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's just but you're just like alone, trapped in a dark room somewhere, playing this on a Vita than, playing it online with people. You know
what the game kind of reminded me of? Because I actually just played the demo a few days ago. It reminded me of Detroit, as well as I played Heavy Rain in the past, where a lot of those games are very much decision-based. And I'm the type of person, I like games because of the story.
Right.
And so for me, like this, Detroit, Heavy Rain, like Persona, we can even go like Persona series. I like games where I can sort of create my own fate. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, me too. I mean, especially you mentioned the magic word Persona. That's a huge influence.
Persona 5 I played last year when it came out. I'm actually playing Persona 4 Golden again.
Nice.
I'm replaying it. It's one of my favorite games of all time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if you read the news, but a couple of days ago, they actually announced that they were no longer going to support physical copies of the PS Vita games starting February 2019. So
right. Well, they can no longer be manufactured.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got that memo as well.
See, I feel like I'm an outlier because I love my Vita and I still play it, and there's a lot of games that I continue playing on it, and it went down like this weird path where of kind of like PlayStation sort of gave a weird type of support to it. but like games like this, like Home and Alone with You, I played on the Vita.
Yeah, it's we get a huge amount of fan support for those platforms. Like the loudest voices are always the Vita players.
Oh, that's cool.
And they're always very loud, polite voices, I should add, not like some other platforms.
When you see it, they're coming out pretty strong.
Yeah, always. It's great.
Always. In my head, it feels like it's easier as an indie developer to publish your game through means of Steam or mobile. Like that trajectory is a lot easier. What is the process like releasing for PS4 and PS Vita for you?
Well, it's obviously more complex because you have to do things like go through certification and a bunch of other stuff I'm not allowed to talk about probably because of NDAs. But you have to plan a lot. And that's why I said before, people who want to get into indie games really need the experience of working in places where they get to do all these other like sort of soft skill, get that kind of experience. Where if I didn't have experience, planning website projects that take 6 months and have all these moving parts and all these people involved and dealing with schedules and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if I'd be able to deal with a console release where you have to plan things. You're not planning things a couple days in advance. You're planning them several months and more, where chunks of your time can be eaten up in weeks, not hours, where you just know that something is going to take a week before you can move on to the next step, or something is going to take several days or whatnot, because it's a different kind of machine than just, kind of hitting an upload button through Steam and going from there.
Yeah. That's really, I think it's really cool that your games are available through the PlayStation Store.
Well, they've been so supportive of us, and I've said this a million times, but they basically approached us. They kind of scouted Toronto devs many years ago. In fact, Valve did as well. The reason why we were on Steam and some other people got on Steam around the same time was Valve came to Toronto at the behest of Cappy Games, who also works here, and introduced themselves to developers. And if it's kind of funny to think of now, but they were like, hey, please release your games on Steam. And we were like, well, let me think about that. But of course, eventually everybody did. And with Sony, it was the same thing. In the early days of the PS4, just before it launched, they were coming to scout developers at some events that people ran here, and then just checked out tons of stuff. And they wanted Home on Vita, and I said, I want Home on Vita. And then we talked to our middleware people and said, like, when do we get to make PlayStation games, and I bugged the crap out of them until all the sort of planets aligned and it happened, and then we got the PS4 and Vita versions of Home, and of course, then Alone with You.
Did you have to do anything different coding-wise for it to come out on the PlayStation consoles?
So I use middleware like a lot of other developers use. I use GameMaker Studio. Now I'm using GameMaker Studio 2, which has been out since last year. And so one of the benefits of using middleware, like all devs know, it means that you can reduce the amount of time you have to spend customizing your code base for multiple platforms. And
for sure.
No word of a lie, like there are 9 SKUs of Home, I think, when you include sort of Steam and non-Steam versions and all that kind of stuff. And they're all off the same code base. Like it's,
okay.
I hit some switches, I press a button, I compile for the correct platform, and if I haven't screwed anything up, then technically it should work. But of course, there are lots of little things you have to do. So every version of Home has code for everything in there, and it just does what it needs to depending on where you're running it.
To talk about the second game, Alone with You, I played through, I think, 2 of the paths, or 2 of the potential relationships that you could have gone through. But I do have... the game really fascinated me because when I first downloaded the game, it said that it was a sci-fi romance. But playing it did have romance, but I felt like it wasn't in a traditional sense the main focus, because for me the story was very much about how a space colony passed and died out, and kind of the romance part felt secondary. Yeah,
that got a lot of attention around review time, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I like that because I, as much as the next person, I do like a good romance story, but it was like, I like how the romance was very much more of when you talk to the holograms and you get to know them, it was more like an organic growth versus like a regular dating sim. It's like, this is a potential partner. We're going to flirt with them right now.
Yeah, my idea and probably mistake was that I kind of wanted to make a romance story for busy adults, where this whole part where you're speaking with the holograms and you're getting to know them and you're progressing relationships, like you say, is one part of the experience. It's not the only thing that you're doing, which is, of course I realize much more in hindsight, probably less appealing to people who want specifically romance games. But like something like Persona, where you're doing other things, the idea was that you have sort of a main quest that you're on, but while you're doing those main quest things, what you're probably doing is thinking and spending all your mental energy wondering about these people you're going to meet later on.
I was about to say, I agree with you, especially like Persona 5, you're trying to solve a bunch of crimes around the town, and then part of the developing your confidant would say Makoto or An, for example, is secondary. It's when it's not part of the main storyline.
Right, and that was kind of the mold that we used. It was specifically Persona based, but obviously it doesn't play anything like Persona. It just uses some of the same structure, but in a different way.
Yes.
And the idea there was that, like with Home, the 50% of the experience that a player brings in Alone with You is meant to be like that emotional connection where hopefully, if we did our job right, and I'm not sure that we did, but this is the attempt, that as you're going through the sort of regular day-to-day missions and you're getting all this information about these colonists and things that happen, and you're learning more about the history and really piecing together what was going on, you're really starting to pine for some attention from one of the 4 colonists or maybe more of them, because you suddenly either hear something about them that you think, oh, well, now I want to know what they meant.
More about them.
Yeah, or you're just kind of like, I really like them. And I've found that with very few exceptions, most people have a favorite pretty regularly. Like they slip into a favorite pretty easily. And I want to ask you who your favorite was.
Oh, man. I forgot her name, but my favorite's the one with the red hair.
Winnie.
Yes, that was the one that I chose. That was the one that I chose first.
Right. And how about the second time?
The second time, I actually chose the guy with the black, like, flat top hair.
Yeah. Oh my god, I can't remember the name of the characters.
I know.
Jean.
Yeah, so those were the 2 characters I played with first. I actually didn't play with the other characters
Right.
Actually, speaking to what you're saying, I didn't felt a real connection to them, so I just decided to, I wouldn't go through their paths.
Each of the characters is meant to represent particular personality types. So usually if there's someone that I know fairly well, I can kind of guess who they're going to be interested in based on which personality types I think they're attracted to. So it's a bit of a psych profile thing.
I had a friend who also we played it at the same time, and she chose the other girl, the girl with the brown hair.
Leslie.
Yes. I think that was the girl who was in the planetarium, I think, or like...
She was in the Agrodomes.
Yes, there you go.
She was the gardener.
Yeah. I liked her. That was really random. I liked her at first, but then I was like, I think I'm more of a Winnie person, actually, now that I'm playing or learning more about their story.
That's funny. That's exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping to create, so I love hearing about these kind of stories.
Oh my gosh. When you first created those games, did you already know from the beginning that you were going to kind of delve into different endings and different paths? Or were you writing one story at first and then you kind of realized, but like maybe this ending would work, and then it kind of became a waterfall. It's like, there's actually a lot of endings that I would like to see play out.
So this goes back to a question that I get very often, especially on forums and stuff, and it always frustrates people when I tell them the answer. The question is there one true ending to Home? And I think that goes to what you're saying, but the answer is no. There was never intended to be one true ending to Home. There's no canon ending.
Yeah.
Because to me, that defeats the purpose of that particular game.
Got it.
It was designed that the true ending is what you believe it is. And,
yes.
And hopefully I give you kind of enough rope to hang yourself with, and it all makes sense in the end. So it was always intended to have multiple paths and interpretations. And the way I worked at it was that there are 5 very particularly strong interpretations, at least from the way I mapped out the game and the choices that you make and some of the feedback that you get. And very quickly after I started showing people the game in the beginning, they started coming up with stuff that I never thought of, including some really weird stuff that I just started throwing in little hints of random things that I'd never accounted for, so that are still in the game, because I thought, well, if they think this is what's going on, I don't want to disappoint them, because that's the whole point of the game. So I'll just throw in a few sprites here and there and a couple nods to something, and maybe that'll keep their theory going. And it's like when you hear people create like a conspiracy theory around something, and they're just so convinced because to them, like, all the math adds up and everything makes 100% perfect sense. And then you talk to whoever's in charge of whatever they're discussing, and they say, oh, no, none of that's true. Like, the answer is, we made something blue because it was the only color we had, and that was it. So I wanted to feed the minds of people who would create those insane conspiracy theories and basically make a game for people who love to chew on that stuff.
Yes. I really appreciate that, because I'm that type of person
right.
who is like trying to think, but like, that object was this, so maybe it goes in a different path.
Yeah, I'm totally the same way, which is why I thought it would be, why it would make sense. And for Alone With You, it was that, obviously we have the idea of the four holograms, and there's some other sort of relationship angles in there as well. So that was obviously meant to be multipath, and that was also meant to feel like you get a definitive answer in a couple different ways by the end of the game. However, the real sort of journey that you're on is about your relationship with these people. So
yes.
How you feel towards them can vary depending on how much time you spend with them versus other people, whether you split your time or you're much more loyal, and some of these other answers you give to questions and things. What we tried to do with that one, especially for the console versions, was we wanted to make sure that the trophies encourage you to play the game different ways. So you would start seeing that, oh, wait a minute, there are things that you can do to change how this works and to get a different perspective on things.
It's on the home website where people can submit what they felt like their final theory was.
Yes, that was an intention from the very beginning.
Yeah.
We wanted to put that in, and it was built into the mobile version as well.
Yeah, I remember, because I got this one. Okay, spoiler. I'm going to spoiler tag this real quick for our listeners. I just interpreted it as he he was the one who committed the crime and he killed his wife, and that the wife was having an affair. And then all of a sudden I go on this website and it's like, oh, they're a figment of his imagination. I was like, what? Like it was so hard for me to comprehend like where that came from, and then I had to think back at the story again, and then like rethink my theory of what everything was.
Yeah, there's quite a wide range of submissions. And there are some ones that are still up on the site that just scare the crap out of me, because the people who wrote them, like I post them as they wrote them, and they're in character, in universe, really dark and disturbing.
I know.
But they come up with these ideas that I had not thought of, or at least sort of angles on them that I had not considered.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them really interesting, that people were into it. It's
Definitely.
like people were basically writing their own fanfic and submitting it.
Yeah, man. I love narrative games.
Right. Well, hey,
Yes.
thanks for playing them and thinking that is a good way to do it.
So to end the podcast, I just have a few, like, now we're kind of going into the more like fun questions, I guess. But
Sure.
yeah, so what game are you playing right now for fun?
Oh boy. Well, I actually just finished playing a bunch of Fatal Frame games. I've been playing horror games nonstop for about the past 8 months.
Ooh.
So I just finished playing Fatal Frame on PS2, like the original, and then I played the newest one, Maiden of Blackwater, on Wii U. And I've also got Spirit Camera, which is a spin-off for 3DS that I haven't quite finished yet.
But speaking of horror games, I got a suggestion from someone that I should play Alien Isolation, if you ever played it before.
Yeah, I have played it. It sort of follows a lot of those games that came out at the time of like the sort of first-person hidey kind of horror monster kind of stuff. I think there's some other games that did it a bit better, though, in terms of just like sheer terror. But it's funny how so many of those games actually, like especially the newer ones that are like first-person, like great 3D visuals, all that kind of stuff, how so many of them are basically like direct descendants of old games from like Japanese PC titles from the 80s and old NES games and stuff like that. That's kind of what I love, is that those ideas can definitely come back.
I remember playing Fatal Frame for like 10 minutes, and then I left the room because it was a family party like way back, and my cousins were playing it, and I walked in because I thought they were playing Final Fantasy. It turns out they're playing Fatal Frame, and then I was like, nope, I'm not going to stay here.
It's the wrong FF.
I know, it's the wrong FF. It is a really creepy game, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really there's a lot of things that series got right from day one that I think a lot of people missed, including myself. I didn't play them actually at the time, and there's still some incredible technical achievements that those games managed, even leading up to the Wii U game, that kind of people just never notice, but they're really impressive today.
I read on your bio that not only are you a game developer, but you're also a comic book artist. And you have created your own comic or graphic novel called Snow. And
yeah, that was the last book that we did.
You're just you're kind of doing everything, really.
I can't, I have a hard time sitting in one space for too long in terms of projects. So
definitely.
Right now I'm working on our third title, and then I'm also working on a new comic book because it's been too long since Snow came out, and I got to get off my butt and get another comic book out.
Nice. I'm just curious, did you watch Infinity Wars yet?
I did. What'd
you think of it?
See, so, okay, here's the thing. I'm a huge comic book fan, but I'm actually not a huge Marvel movie fan.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I just kind of got bored of them after a while, but I went in and absolutely loved this movie because it actually felt like an old school, late 80s Marvel, like, cosmic adventure.
Yeah.
So I was totally on board. I was surprised. I love the whole thing.
I think the only comics that I've read before were Captain America, and they were only a few comics. So I'm only watching the Marvel movies, and I made this joke, and it was like, after watching this movie, of all the 3 Avengers movies that I've seen, I think this was the only one that they were actually avenging something.
That's so funny.
I know, because if you think about it, the first 2 movies are about superhero egos of working as a team.
That is very true.
And then finally this movie's like, oh yeah, we are actually Avengers. We're going to finally be exactly what our name is.
It was a slow burn to get there, but they finally did.
I know. For anyone who is interested in being an indie developer and kind of interested in being their own one-man team, what are some like advice and recommendations that you have for people starting out?
So there's two main things. First, in regards to game development specifically, in order to be a game developer, you have to make games, and that means you have to make a whole lot of them. And the best way to do that is to just get involved with jams, work on projects, whatever you can. It's not about making anything good. Just accept that it's going to take you a long time to make something good. You just want to keep making stuff. The biggest trick about making a game, or really completing any creative project, is that you kind of don't, like, you don't actually get to cash in your XP unless you finish the project. So you have to go through the whole loop from beginning to shipping. And in the case of just sort of working on stuff, shipping might just be finishing the game and showing it to people that you know, or demoing it, or putting it on itch for free, or whatever. That's all totally valid. But you have to go through that whole process, because just having some concepts for a game, or just having like half a level, or just having some sound design, but sort of not a completed game, that won't kind of teach you what you need to know. So to that end, just work small. Don't make the game the epic, fantasy adventure you've always wanted to make. Make the dumb arcade clone first, like the one screen arcade clone, and then make 10 more of those until you get better and better, and then start understanding what it is you really want to do. And that's the same if you want to make comics or anything else. You make a 1-page story, or a 1-panel story, then a 2-panel story, then a 1-page, then a 3-page, and you don't make a 200-page graphic novel on your first try. It's just the way things go, and that's totally fine. And you'll learn way more, much more quickly, and you'll be able to sort of bound ahead, because all that experience will add up. And for company stuff, kind of like I said before, the main thing is you're not going to realize what you don't know until you realize you don't know it. And so the best way to be prepared for any kind of experience, like running a company and running your own creative business, is to watch other people do it and talk to smart people. So working for other people and seeing how they do it, or seeing how they don't do it, or whether you think they're right or wrong, all that experience is valid. And from there, you can actually start, again, leaping ahead and understanding, oh, okay, now I see why things get, scheduled a certain way. Now I understand why we have a milestone on certain kinds of dates, or with certain parameters in mind. Now I see why, whereas I thought we needed 2 people to do this job, we have 1 or 3 or whatnot. Like, all these things sort of inform all your decisions later on. And you have to go through that loop a whole lot too. So the more experience you have, the better you will be equipped to handle that. But, and on my sort of final comment on this, I would say the best experience you will ever have running a creative studio will likely have nothing to do with the field that you're interested in. And that's why I always say the best experience I ever got, and the reason why I'm able to do what I do, is because I worked in a kitchen for 7 months when I was like 17, and I got to learn the most important skills that I know now, which are prioritization, time management, like task prioritization, and then people and management skills, just dealing with a team. Not as a leader. In that case, I was sort of the lowest person on the floor, but understanding why we were working towards a common goal, how that worked, what my role was in that moment, and then what I need to do in stages, this minute, in the next hour, during the shift, all that kind of stuff. So don't think that you have to go through like $1 million game design class or a bunch of other stuff just to learn these skills. If you work a quote unquote regular job somewhere, pay attention, follow the people who are higher up, see what they're doing, see how they get things done during the day, and you will learn a ton that you can then apply to any business or creative endeavor.
Very well said. Thank you so much for joining on the podcast again.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully this was, helpful to your readers and at least a little bit interesting. This has been the 52nd episode of the Downtime Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
See ya!